What is going on, Sabres fans, and welcome to another episode of the Sabres Spotlight podcast where we shine a light on all things Sabres hockey. Here with you tonight is Matt, and I'm running this show solo, as we alluded to a little bit on our last episode. So Ryan is a little bit busy right now, but he will be joining us in the coming weeks to get season 2 underway. And the Sabres are, in fact, underway. We've had a couple games that have already been played overseas in Prague, and we will go over the results of those towards the end of the show here. On today's show, what I really want to focus on, besides reflecting on those first couple games and giving the listeners some of my thoughts and opinions on obviously the poor start and where things are heading, is to go through some burning questions that we have going into the 2024 season. So I'm gonna start off with those, and the nice thing about having a couple games under our belt is that as we go through these and some of these thoughts that we had jotted down, we can get a little bit of immediate feedback from the first couple games that we've already seen and how we're maybe seeing some of these kind of come into shape and what's going to happen with some of these thoughts that we have as the season continues to play out and what is a critical season for the Buffalo Sabres heading into this 2024-25 season, a season that they need to get over the hump and need to make the playoffs. Enough is enough. So let's see what they can do this season. But the first question we have, which maybe we haven't talked enough about actually on this show yet, besides reflecting on the initial hire and things, is Lindy Ruff. And how exactly do we think this team is going to respond to his coaching style? You heard at the end of last season that the players were craving accountability, and it seems like they got all that during the training camp. Seemed to be much more intense than the training camp that Don had run last year, and so that's all good. But there's still a change at the helm, and you never know how players are going to respond to that and how he's demanding them physically on the ice. And Lindy's talked about the need for quick pace, quick defensive stops, zone breakouts. Some of these things are things that Don talked about last year as far as playing with pace, but there wasn't enough structure. There wasn't enough organization to the game plans and Don's coaching style last season. So that's an adjustment for these players. A lot of these players, although they have been around for some time and we have some veterans on this team now, there's a lot of young players in this organization too and a lot of new players. So it'll be interesting to see how the team responds to Lindy. Some of the criticism out there, which I think is fair and warranted, is Lindy had a young team in Jersey, and had was a Jack Adams finalist a couple years ago, had an awesome year with the New Jersey Devils, and I think it's fair to say that last year his New Jersey team, they got banged up with some injuries. They obviously didn't have the goaltending, but there's been some criticism about the hire and how fast it was, and maybe there wasn't this extensive coaching search. And are the players going to respond to this new guy coming in, and is Lindy Ruff going to be able to get the most out of this young group like he did at least for one season in Jersey, but couldn't parlay that into a second good season. So all that we'll see how that goes. The other thing alongside Lindy Ruff is a new assistant coach that's in town, Seth Appert, who I'm a big fan of. And we might think that Seth Appert is eventually going to supersede Lindy, depending on what happens there over the next couple of years. With Lindy Ruff as the head coach, Seth Appert could be in line for the head coaching job in a couple of years. And if he does well in his role as the power play coordinator and helping Lindy, over these next couple of years as the assistant, then that could, be where we eventually transition to things. And I'd be open to that after a couple of years of NHL experience. But a little bit of background on Seth Appert. So Seth became the assistant at the University of Denver, 1999, where he stayed until 2006. He won 2 national championships with Denver. After that 2006 season, he was hired as head coach of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where he coached there from 2007 to 2017. He actually finished with a record there of 152, 221, and 48. So throughout that tenure there, he had a few good years where they had a winning record, a lot of down years, but a little bit of inconsistencies. So he ended up actually being removed from the head coaching position there In 2017. He worked as an assistant coach at the U.S. National Team Development Program, as well as the United States under 18 team. And he was named the Rochester Americans head coach on August 14th of 2020. So spent a few years in Rochester, had really good success there. Made the playoffs in all few years, had a deep playoff run a couple years ago, and unfortunately lost in the first round of the playoffs last season to Syracuse, the team he had beaten the year before. But all in all, a good run with the Rochester Americans, and now he finds himself as the assistant to Lindy Ruff. But Seth Appert comes in with no NHL coaching experience, of course, but with a plethora of experience working with young kids and having success working with young kids. And this Sabres roster is young, like we've talked about. They have some prospects that could potentially be contributing as early as this season. Most notably, Yuri Kulik. They have Zach Benson, who is kind of already established himself as an NHL player, but definitely a young player that we're looking to continue to develop. And the big question with Appert too is how is he going to structure this power play? The power play is something that needs to improve, and that's actually going to lead me into. I'll go there right now. The third burning question that I have that goes right alongside with the Seth Appert here is how is this power play going to look under Seth Appert in 2024-2025? The Sabres ranked 29th in power play percentage last season with a 16.59 power play percentage. So the league average last year was 21%. 12 of those 16 teams that finished above that 21% number actually made the playoffs. So having a good power play, it's not a surprise to anybody listening here, is fairly well correlative with making the playoffs. The four teams that finished above that, the top half number in terms of power play percentage that did not make the playoffs were Detroit, who missed by 1 point, I think on the very last day, Minnesota, who had a nice run at the end, the Devils, who we already talked about, and then Utah, who had a bunch of off ice thing going on with Arizona there. That was kind of a mess for a little bit there. But Seth Appert and this power play, it's not off to the best start, but there's been signs, especially in the preseason. I know you take preseason for what it's worth. You maybe look at that with a grain of salt, but they had some success in the preseason. We saw some sustained time in the offensive zone, an easier time kind of gaining puck possession in that offensive zone, getting things set up and running some set plays, which is something that we really didn't see any of last year. Much more movement on the power play. So I'm excited to see what can happen here. The thing with the power play is there doesn't really need to be goals are helpful. Obviously, everyone wants goals on the power play. That's the main objective of the power play. And that's something that we need to see improve. We need to be in that upper half this season if we're going to make a push towards the playoffs. But there's a lot of value in just having a good power play in general in terms of swinging momentum in the game, giving players confidence. If it's a night where we just don't have it, but you get that one power play and you're able to rip off, 3 good scoring opportunities and get a few shots on net, well, that's enough to swing momentum in your favor. Get some guys that were maybe in their head a little bit on the ice that night, thinking more positively. So the power play can affect much more than the actual score in terms of the outcome of the game. So that's something that we need to see improve going into this season. And it's going to be interesting to see the plans that Lindy and Seth have for the power play. And hopefully it works out and doesn't cost us as many games as it did last season. Moving on to my next point here. This will come as no surprise to everybody. The Sabres were one of the most inconsistent teams last season. So the Sabres had 2 win streaks of 3 games or more last season, and not a single one that was longer. So no really big win streaks last season. It felt like every time you got that win, there was an immediate loss. You pick up a win or two, okay, we're starting to get on a little bit of a streak, and then immediately a step back. And a lot of that was killed because of the power play. was killed because of just inconsistent gameplay. And because goaltending wasn't really an issue, so it was a lack of scoring, it was a lack of structure, and it was just a lack of overall power play consistency in offensive output on the ice. But their first stretch of wins of three games or more last season did not come until almost March. So they won 3 games in a row: February 21st, February 23rd, and February 25th. That's too late in the season. The second stretch came shortly after that, March 9th, March 12th, and March 14th. So kind of a stat that I looked up. I was curious to see. I went through the schedule last season, and I wanted to find out, all right, how did the Sabres perform in games after a win? So when they won, did they win that next game? Did they lose that next game? And the Sabres, after a win, had a record of 10, 15, and 5, which that number is not surprising to anybody, knowing that the inconsistencies that this team had last season. But man, that is tough. There's no way you're basically 10 and 20 after a win. You're able to stack a win streak of 2 games, 1 out of every 3 times. That just has to improve. You got to stack more wins. You got to find a way to play better hockey for longer stretches of times. It seemed like last season the Sabres kind of beat up on some of the bad teams. We talked about that a couple of shows ago, where they had a good record against bad teams and they couldn't figure out against the good teams. So last season was more of like, okay, we're not this like horrible team, and we have enough offensive skill where like on any given night any team can win. So you go out there and win your games once in a while, but you just don't have enough. You don't have enough grind, and you don't have enough kind of like sandpaper or edge on the ice to edge out some of those wins. Certainly not enough structure or game plan from a coaching philosophy. So that should improve this year under Lindy. That should improve this year with the help of Seth Appert, and hopefully improving some of the scoring. But consistency, it has to be there more. That you can't have these lulls and not able to stack wins. That's very important. The next burning question that we have here is, what is this fourth line going to do? The Sabres got rid of Jeff Skinner. They bought him out. They didn't bring in another top 6 forward, which at this point in time, especially after these first couple of games, only scoring 2 goals, everyone's questioning, and justifiably so. I think that the Sabres can still make this work. The sky's not necessarily falling after these first couple of games, but we'll get into that in a little bit. There's a lot of things that we're not good. We're not impressed with these first couple of games, but it doesn't mean that the Sabres not bringing in a top 6 forward automatically means that they're not going to be able to score this season, or they're not going to have enough offense. I think there's still possibilities for that. But you don't address a top 6 forward, even though you cleared up all this space from Jeff Skinner and buying him out. And you really just kind of revamp this bottom line, which was needed, no doubt. Oposo leaves, Gergensons leaves. Krebs is seemingly no longer in the mix, but will likely kind of play on and off here and there, depending on who's hot. But that new fourth line is pretty much locked in as Beck Malenstein, Sam Lafferty, and Nicholas Aube-Kubel. And I've liked what I've seen so far. This line isn't going to play a ton of minutes, but when you get them in there, what are they doing? Are they hardworking? Are they tough to play against? Are they getting effective minutes that are going to help wear down opponents and make the job of our top couple lines easier as far as our goal scorers, though? That's their job, and I think they'll be able to do that more efficiently than our bottom line last season, who was treading water a lot of the times and just trying to kind of not get scored on and hang in there. I think this is an upgraded fourth line that can actually make a difference in the outcome of the games in a positive way. But it's going to be interesting to see how they do. I like the speed. Nicholas Aube-Kubel got absolutely robbed blind in the first game by Jacob Markstrom on a goal that he should have easily had, and Markstrom just made a great save. But this is supposed to be the line that, Adams kind of sunk his teeth into this line a little bit. He's kind of doubled down on this was their main goal this season, to revamp the bottom six and become tougher to play against, harder to play against. In his mind, in Kevin Adams' mind, that was the answer. The answer wasn't getting another top six forward. The answer wasn't, getting more scoring or adding to that forward group on the third line. It was, I need to revamp this bottom six line and become a little bit tougher, become a little bit grittier. And he's banking on a lot of the things we discussed a couple episodes ago coming true, in terms of the guys that he already has in place taking steps, and the couple signings that he made and Zucker and things working out. And I guess we'll see. But this line is going to be a major component to what happens this season. And if it works out, then the Sabres will have more consistency and more success, because they're getting more effective minutes from the bottom six. My question is there going to be enough scoring to kind of match with that? So that's what we'll have to see. But the fourth line is something that all of us, I know, will be keeping a close eye on over these first handful of games, and 10 games or so, to see what effect they're having on the game. I want to talk face-offs next. Not something that we've stressed a lot on this podcast, but again, something I wanted to dive into a little bit more, because the Sabres over the last handful of years have not been great at face-offs. And as trivial as it may seem, there's a lot of value to winning face-offs, and winning face-offs at the right times. You're sending out a fresh Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, JJ Peterka in the offensive zone. That's an offensive zone draw that you want to win. You don't want to lose that puck, have these guys checking back on defense and then trying to, regain the zone. And by the time you regain possession of the puck and then get set up in the offensive zone, you've been on the ice for 20 seconds and you're already winded, and then you're less effective in the offensive zone. The same works for defensively. If you are, if you got a defensive zone draw where you got the McLeod line out or the Lafferty line out there, well, that's when you win right away. Win that defensive zone draw so you're not stuck out there. You can keep your legs fresh for the next time you need to do it. Get that puck up the ice, and then get the heavy hitters back on the ice as we gain, more of the offensive. So we need to see the third and fourth lines win more defensive zone draws. We need to see those top couple lines win more offensive zone draws to make the game flow in our favor much more. Very similar to, field possession or field positioning in a football game, right? Kind of the same type of thing. Make sure we're maximizing our efficiency in the offensive zone, and as well as the defensive zone. Career marks, found this interesting. I'm going to go through the centers here on the Sabres as well as some of the new guys. So at the very top, Tage Thompson, career faceoff win percentage is 42%. Dylan Cousins, career 46.6. Peyton Krebs, 44.4. Ryan McLeod is 49.0. And Sam Lafferty is 46.9. So upgrades in percentage slightly with our couple new additions in McLeod and Lafferty. But those numbers just aren't going to get it done. I'd like us to be around 55% for the season. That I feel like 55-60% would be a good mark for this team. Now, not that all these guys need to be up there, but if you can consistently see some improvements, we definitely need improvements from these numbers, right? Especially 42 from Tage. That's your top line center. Dylan Cousins at 46.6% is not bad, but let's get some marginal improvements across the board here from all these guys. And not even marginal. If I can get like 5 or 6% on these guys as far as win percentage goes, I feel like that can make a big difference in faceoffs. Faceoffs killed this team last season, losing faceoffs at the right time and just consistently losing faceoffs again and again. So something that we haven't discussed as much, but I wanted to take a look into, and those numbers kind of paint a good picture. So we'll see where those numbers go as the season progresses. The first couple games we had, we'll go through the numbers in a minute, but we had basically one really good game with faceoffs and one really bad game with faceoffs, and so the jury's still out on that. But hopefully, there's some progress there throughout this season. The last thing I want to get into here before we transition into our reflection on the first couple games that we saw over in Prague, which I have a lot of thoughts on, is looking at the question of the remaining cap space that the Sabres have left and what are they going to do with it? Are they going to do anything with it at all? So Puckpedia has the Sabres using $81 million of the $88 million salary cap, so it leaves pretty much $7 million left over in money. So I'm of the belief that Kevin Adams isn't the greatest at getting things done, at being a facilitator of moves, at getting trades done, enticing players to Buffalo. But at the same time, I can appreciate how difficult that is in the Sabres market right now. So I think there's a little bit of I guess, inhibition on both sides here of players not wanting to come, but also Adams' inefficiencies at getting things done with other general managers and getting the right players here. So that I can appreciate the difficulty there. However, I want to lay out where there are maybe some advantages to waiting to spend that money, if that's the right term to use. I think we're all that's an optimistic word, right? Waiting, hoping that something is going to happen. But if that is what's happening, then there are advantages to that. And the most obvious one is, of course, injuries. Now, this is injuries to Sabres players, of course. That is going to happen throughout the season, as much as we don't want that to. And hopefully this season we're healthier than we were last year and avoiding any major injuries. But that can dictate where your team needs are a lot. If where you have better depth perhaps this year than years past, especially in the forward group. But again, middling forwards, not your top tier guys. And defensively, maybe you have a couple more options there as well. But if you don't like any of your options as far as internally, then injuries could potentially dictate where you need to go. And perhaps waiting to kind of see where that is throughout the season could be beneficial. So you can kind of pinpoint where those needs are a little bit more. Also, injuries to your trade partners. So are there teams that have accumulated injuries and teams that were supposed to be in the race that have now dropped out of the race, and more players become available that weren't there before? So that could potentially, open up a path for a deal to get done that wasn't going to be on the table in the summer when any of those, injury variables didn't exist. So player movement and player injuries throughout the season really can dictate a lot as far as trades getting done and player movement across the league. And if Kevin Adams is going to be able to get things done, then he could potentially have a little bit more leverage and a little bit more urgency to do so as the season progresses. Now, there are disadvantages to waiting. I think the biggest one here is that you have to be in a contending spot to make this happen. And that's something that the Sabres have not been able to do by the trade deadline over the last couple seasons. They've been kind of out of it. I guess a couple years ago they were right there, but nothing was done. And I think that was a mistake, and they could have pushed in a little bit harder at the deadline to get something done a couple years ago when they missed by 1 point. But that's in hindsight. Last year there was no need to make a move because it just wasn't going to happen. They were already too far out of it. the team was in shambles under Donnie Meatballs. But a big disadvantage to not getting anything done right now is if the team doesn't perform the way that we're all hoping and they're not towards a contending spot, are you going to have the need to make that move anyways? And is a player who potentially has a no trade clause to come to Buffalo going to just waive that if you're not in a contending spot and you're not going to make the playoffs? You could potentially get a player to come to you and actually waive his no trade clause if you have yourself in a good spot and he could see maybe he's an RFA on a team that's contending right now for a Stanley Cup and he knows he's not going to get a contract with that team next season. So, hey, I could go to a young up and coming team in the Sabres. They have the potential to make the playoffs this season and I could potentially earn more money from them as opposed to this team that I'm with that's probably going to get rid of me because they need cap space, for the next year. So there's a lot of variables with this. I think the ultimate point here is that the roster doesn't have to be done right now. It doesn't have to be finalized right now. There is chances for movement in season, and hopefully that's what we get. Because I don't know if they can get there with what they currently have. Again, I'm trying not to overreact to these first couple games, but I think they might need a little bit more help, and hopefully they can keep themselves afloat long enough and stay in the race long enough to get something done. And then the big question, the biggest burning question of it all is can Kevin Adams do that? Can Kevin Adams get the player that he needs? Can he bring that guy in? Is Terry going to let him do that? Those are the questions we'll continue to ask ourselves as the season goes on. But that's kind of a recap of some thoughts that I had on my mind going into the season here. I want to transition into the game reflections here because we did have some Sabres hockey in the forms of the NHL Global Series, which was pretty cool. I mean, cool. I feel like it was fun and it was unique as long as you were a fan of the Devils or a fan of the Sabres or just like a super like diehard hockey fan, because it didn't feel like something that was like overly hyped up by the NHL. And it felt a little weird to like have the Sabres like and the Devils playing regular season games while other teams are still playing preseason games. So it was cool. I'm sure it was a good experience and a fun time for the players. And by all the social media accounts, it looks like they enjoyed themselves, probably happy to be home now. But just a little bit weird. I felt like it could have been done a little bit better. But nonetheless, the Sabres start in Prague and they go 0-2. So we'll kind of recap the games here and then give some overarching thoughts on what we saw. So we lose the first game 4-1. The Sabres go down 2-0 after the first period, down 3-0 after the second period. Owen Power ends up scoring the lone goal for the Sabres in the third period. And I'm pretty sure the Devils netted an empty net goal to get to their fourth goal. But another slow start for the Sabres that we saw last season. And UPL, I thought UPL was fine in net. I mean, the save percentage doesn't look sexy, only an 864. But, I mean, he only saw 23 shots, so can't really blame him. I didn't really feel like any of those were necessarily his fault. There were some defensive breakdowns and things, so it wasn't like a rock star performance from UPL, but I don't think that he really cost us the game here as well. The whole game just seemed kind of sluggish from the Sabres end, a little bit disjointed. But the power play is 0 for 4, so not a great start for the power play there. Penalty kills 2 for 2. We did do fairly well on faceoffs, so 34 wins, 25 faceoff losses. So that's actually a 57.6 win percentage for the faceoff. So I like that number. There. Zach Benson gets a little banged up in this game. reported as a lower body injury. He is expected to be back at practice on Tuesday, but this injury held him out of the second game, and Yuri Kulik played in his place, which is fine. That's why you have him there, and cool for him that he got to play a game in Czechia as well. But I want to go through the defensive pairs and the time on ice. This is something that I'm intrigued about early on in the season here, because it feels like the Sabres have three like rock solid defensemen in Byram, Dahlin, and Power. I know the Power take might be bold for some people, but if you've been listening to the show for a while, me and Ryan, we're pretty high on Owen Power. So personally, I think the Sabres have three really solid defensemen with those top three. And then Samuelson's kind of in the middle with Yoki Haru, and then Clifton's kind of at the bottom. So that's kind of where I have things. The time on ice is interesting. So Byram in game one had almost 25 minutes, and I thought he looked great. I think the Byram and Owen Power pair is played pretty well in these first couple games. So nearly 25 minutes for Byram in game one. Owen Power plays 23 and a half. Dahlin gets 22, almost 23 minutes. And then you get 16 minutes from Yoki Haru, about 16 minutes from Samuelson, and then 13 and a half minutes with Connor Clifton. So I feel like that dispersion is good. I think that's probably what we'll see consistently from the Sabres. Those numbers were very similar in the second game as well, as far as the time on ice goes. Almost similar numbers for game two. I will say I don't love Yoki Haru. I did not like that signing when we re-signed him, and we'll get into that a little bit more at the end. But I thought he played two really bad games. I think he was a net negative overall for the Sabres, and he's playing with Dahlin. That's the pair right now, Dahlin and Yoki Haru. So I just don't think that when it comes to Byram and Power, that line has such an identity, and where Power is going to be a little bit more of your defensively responsible defenseman, but can also contribute offensively, where that allows Byram to play a little bit more free, which is more of his playing style. But he's also really not a bad defender either, and he made a couple nice plays defensively in these first couple of games. So I feel like that combination makes a lot of sense. The Dahlin Yoki Aru line on the other side of things, like Dahlin is Dahlin. He's a superstar. He can do it all. And then you have Yoki Haru, who just kind of seems like he struggles to keep up with the pace. He's also like not like the most reliable defenseman. So I just kind of feel like he's mid across the board, and that can really limit Dahlin. So I'm going to be interested to see what happens there. The Samuelson and Clifton line is fine. And for a third pair, I have necessarily no issues with that, besides the fact that they didn't really play that well in these first couple of games. So hopefully they can just kind of be like a stable third line pairing that plays, 13, 14 minutes a game and doesn't cost you, and can kind of block shots and maybe contribute a little bit on the penalty kill and things like that. But I didn't love the game from either one of those. The first two games, Samuelson had a horrible giveaway in the first game, trying to give a defensive breakout pass to Zucker, and it just went right to the team. He basically got a secondary assist to the Devils on that, but not a highlight moment for Samuelson, and he had a couple bad defensive plays. But I kind of have some faith in Samuelson and Clifton to figure it out. Clifton last season started off really bad and then kind of picked it up throughout the last of. He might just be one of those guys who's a slow starter, but I think him and Clifton can work it out. But all in all, the defense was not bad. I mean, well, let me take that back. They were bad because Samuelson and Clifton were also bad, but I think we'll be okay with them. But Yoki Haru is a big question mark for me. So we'll see what happens for that. Second game, they lose 3-1. So they actually score the first goal 8 minutes into the second period. Get a shot on that, little bit of a scrum in front, and Tage eventually kind of knocks it in. But, of course, then we don't score again. I thought Devin Levi played well in this game. This game could have been a lot worse. Devin Levi stops 34 of 37 for a .919 save percentage. He looked good. He made a lot of tough saves, had a couple breakaway saves. He kept us in that game for quite some time. Peterka gets taken out in this game early on with a blow to the head by Devils defenseman Brendan Dillon. Tuck addressed that right away and fought with him. Admittedly, I would like to see a little bit more of a response from the team. It's nice to see Tuck drop the gloves and not hesitate doing that. He dropped them right away, but I was kind of hoping to see, maybe a little bit more like hitting after that, especially from the fourth line, and you didn't really get any of that. Maybe that was on purpose from Lindy, just saying like, hey, it's only game 2, like we don't need to go crazy. You don't really know, and maybe he felt like it was already addressed enough with the talk. It's something that could also be addressed later on in the season, so that wouldn't be uncommon next time. So we can kind of keep an eye out for that, next time we play them. But Peterka hasn't been ruled out for Thursday's game yet, but we'll see. I would imagine that he had a concussion, and those things usually take a week or two to kind of clear up. So it'd be nice if he can be back. They're going to have to juggle some things around if he's not back and for Thursday. But hopefully he's not out for an extended period of time, and we can get him back because he seems primed for a breakout campaign, and we're going to need his goal scoring this year. Power play is 0 for 2. So there you go. First 2 games, 0 for 6 combined from the power play. Penalty kill in this game was 3 for 4. So you get power play 0 for 6, penalty kill 5 for 6, and faceoffs were way down in this game here. 18 wins, 33 losses, so only a 35.3 faceoff win percentage. We were outshot 37-18 in this game. It's kind of interesting because I feel like the general consensus was the Sabres played better in game 2 than the first game. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't necessarily think they played worse in the second game. I just kind of think both games were really, really bad. But I thought game 2 was worse than game 1. But again, they pretty much looked bad in both of these games, and I was not impressed with where things lay, after these first couple games here. But my overall thoughts here, I'm going to go through a new segment here. This is brand new this season, and Ryan is going to listen back to this show. He doesn't know about it, and we'll see if he likes it. If you hear it again, it's because he likes it. If you don't hear it again, it's because he told me, hey, that was stupid, and we're taking it out. So we'll see. But we're gonna do a little Sabres Spotlight and a little Sabres Lowlight. All right. So this is gonna be players from these first couple games that I want to highlight that played good, and we can be a little positive about, a little optimistic about. And then the lowlights is, all right, are we hitting the panic button? We got alerts up, or they just played bad. Not worried about it. So we'll do the spotlights first. We'll start with the positive, and then we'll transition into the lowlights. I already mentioned him, Devin Levi. First game was awesome, and like I said, that game 1 could have been way worse. The Sabres could have lost that easily by another couple goals. He made some high danger saves. I thought rebound control was really, really good. That's something that we wanted to see him improve last season, or I should say going into this season, but that's something that we noticed last season was he was giving up a lot of juicy rebounds and didn't really get a lot of those in this first game. And Lindy's made it clear that he's going to roll with the hot hand. Now, again, UPL didn't play bad, but you're curious if you could see this be a little bit more of a 50-50 timeshare, or whatever, 55-45. But Lindy's not going to be afraid to roll with the youngster if he's playing good, and he started off really, really nice in his first start there. I'm going to give a shout out spotlight to Alex Tuck. Tuck is, I think I've been a little bit harder on Tuck on this podcast than Ryan, but I thought he looked quick. I thought he was active throughout both of the games. I can appreciate him fighting Brendan Dillon. He hasn't been able to find the scoring that he had from a couple years ago, so we'll see what happens with that this season, especially being on the top line. But he looked good with the stick. He looked smooth. He looked quick. So he seems like he's ready to go at the start of the season here. It didn't turn into anything production wise, but I felt like he played pretty good in these first couple games here. We already mentioned the Byram and Power pair. We'll shout them out again. They looked really good in these first couple games. Also Benson. Zach Benson's going to be my last spotlight here. Only played in the first game, and hopefully he's not injured. Hopefully he's back for Thursday. But this dude is a dog. I mean, he just picked up right where he left off last season. He's just, for a small dude, he's just strong on the pucks. I mean, he won so many puck battles in that first game. He's just scrappy on both ends of the ice. So I just appreciate Benson's game a lot, and I'm I feel pretty good that he can develop into a very nice top six forward. I think he has a very high ceiling, and could he be that hidden top six forward that the Sabres are looking for? Potentially. But the other question that we'll have to start asking ourselves as the season goes on, if we're not getting the production from other guys, is the top six as locked in as we thought it was? Is Dylan Cousins a true, top six forward? Alex Tuck, JJ Paterka, these guys. We think so, and I love all those players, but we'll have to kind of see, because the production has to start to come for a lot of these guys. And Tage Thompson's going to get his, but is he a superstar like we all thought from a couple years ago, or is he just a really good player? So these are questions that will get answered throughout the season here. But I got to give a shout out to Zach Benson, the Goblin, our guy here. We love him on Sabres Spotlight. Let's get into some of the lowlights here now. We already mentioned Matthias Samuelsson and Yoki Haru on the defensive side. Just, a little bit of a mess. Samuelsson he had the bad giveaway, but then he had a awful defensive play too on a 2-on-1 where he just got turned inside out, ended up on the ice, was just kind of flailing, and that was kind of a bad moment for him. So he had a couple bad moments. Hopefully he works it out. Yoki Haru, I was not impressed with. Just doesn't look ready for the season. I'm concerned about his ability to play with Dahlin, and I know he's not always playing with him, but at this point in time, if it's tough because they signed him to that 1-year deal and they gave him a little bit of money, but I'd almost rather see Ryan Johnson playing with him. Like I think the team looks so much better if you have Dahlin and Ryan Johnson on the same D pair, as far as just like synergy with those two players and being able to break the puck up. And Ryan Johnson is like, Dahlin is, as much as he activates offensively, he's so good because he is defensively responsible too. And I feel like Ryan Johnson's not bad with those either. It's a tier obviously below Dahlin, but he can grow into those. I'd rather see Dahlin and Ryan Johnson. As long as Yoki Haru is continuing to look this bad and not play well, I'll be continuing to hope for that. But it seems like they want him to just play and dominate in the AHL this year. But we'll see. He was up last year, so why not? Jack Quinn, I'm going to give a low light to. Low hanging fruit here, I guess, just coming back. But was hopeful that a regular off season and his ability to maybe prepare and train would bear a little bit more of fruits on the ice these first couple games. I just thought he looked kind of slow and sluggish these first couple games. Wasn't impressed with his play there, and it's tough because the whole offense was disjointed. But he didn't get many shots off, so you didn't see any like really offensive, like dangerous plays from him. And thought he got beat to a lot of pucks and was looking to get off the ice quite a bit. So I think he was just kind of a little bit out of shape. But that'll hopefully progress as it goes. And then I put Jason Zucker in here too. Just didn't really get anything from him. New team, so we'll see. But I think it's pretty clear to notice the changes or the value in that revamped fourth line with Avi Kubel, with Beck Malenstein, and with Lafferty and Zucker. He's kind of like on this wild card line. This third line is like a little bit of like a mixed bag with McLeod coming over and Zucker and Greenway. Maybe Krebs is going to be in there a little bit. So that line is kind of like I'm needing to see like where the identity is there. I didn't feel anything from Zucker in these first couple games, and that's a guy that we're looking to, maybe be able to, put away 10 or 15 goals this year. And if we're going to unlock McLeod a little bit, McLeod plays fast, and can he kind of keep up with that? I didn't really feel like he was a much of a difference maker in these first couple games, but we'll see. Obviously where things go. Overall, these first two games, I'm not going to freak out. It's disappointing. It is definitely disappointing because of not necessarily the expectations coming into the year, because the Sabres didn't make those big moves where I think the expectations are there, but they've put that pressure on themselves with, them saying all the right things and what they should be saying as far as like the time to win is now. We got to get this done. And there didn't seem to be like a lack of urgency. Now, the other side of this coin is the Devils could just be that good. We talked about them on the last show. Are the Devils getting overhyped? Perhaps they're not. They look like they're going to be a tough team to play against, a team that can score goals. So you could lose these couple games to Jersey, probably play them another time or two during the year. Maybe you can even that up, go 2-2 against like a really good team. But this could be a Devils team that, that lineup is good. So maybe the Devils are just that good. But nonetheless, I would have liked to see more urgency on the side of the Sabres, and that was disappointing more than anything to see over these first couple games. I think it's fair that we're not overly critical at this point because of some of the changes on the roster, because of the head coaching change, but it's certainly not the start that we wanted to see. Last thing I want to say here is just as much as Dahlin played, he had nearly 25 minutes each game. It looks like he's still dealing with a little bit of a lingering injury there. We don't really know what that is, but he just looked a little bit hampered out there. Still effective on the ice, but hopefully that's healing up and isn't one of those things that's going to kind of nag him all year, because it looked like he maybe wasn't 100%, and something that I want to kind of remind the listeners about and kind of keep a pulse on as we go, because he did get banged up in the preseason there, and we'll kind of check on that as we go there. But it didn't look like he was necessarily 100%, but still effective nonetheless. But that's going to do it for today. So thanks for sticking around with me here. We got our burning questions done. We got our reflection on these first two games. Not the start that the Sabres wanted, but we got two games coming up this week, Thursday and Saturday. Couple of home games. If you can get back to 2-2 on the season, then that's good. I said a few shows ago, I wanted the Sabres to start the season 10-3. I wanted to get off to a hot start. That included a split in Prague with the New Jersey Devils. So that 10-3 marker I was hoping for got a heck of a lot harder without this split. Or sorry, not 10-3, 7-3. So I want to go 7-3 in these first 10 games. So that 7-3 mark gets a little bit harder with going 0-2. You're looking at 7-1. They got a little bit of a softer schedule coming up. They're going to have to probably sneak one from Florida. So we'll see what they can do. But that's going to do it for today. Thanks for sticking around. And you know what to do. Follow us on Twitter. The season is set to go. So come over there and complain with us or hang out at Sabres Spotlight. If you have anything you want us to talk about on the show, send us some feedback. The email is in the show notes. We also got Instagram up and running, and we got the YouTube channel. So lots of different ways to check us out. All that information is in the show notes below. But as always, stay safe in the Sabrehood, and we will see everybody in the next episode. Peace.